2. Fifth late fire moon, September, 3:38 a.m. The last of the adventurers slipped by the barricade and withdrew to the rear. This group of guards had orders to defend this position with their lives until the adventurers had recovered from their wounds. The gap in the barricade, the space that had been opened to let the adventurers through, was immediately barred with lumber. There was no one any farther ahead of them. In other words, this was the front line. Looking behind them, they saw the ragged figures of the retreating adventurers. Their armor was covered with fresh gashes and burns. It had also been dyed with splotches of blood. Beyond them, the wall of flames blazed. They'd come a little over 160 yards into enemy territory. Though they were in their familiar capital, things felt off. It was like they'd entered some alternate, surreal world. The buildings in the area had all collapsed. The guards were manning the barricade they'd built with the time the adventurers bought for them. But although it seemed like the ultimate obstruction a little while ago, it was starting to look incredibly flimsy. Like it would fall with hardly any effort at all.
It's okay. The monsters didn't chase after the adventurers. The enemy isn't planning on attacking. They want to fortify their defenses, just like us. We're fine. We won't get attacked.
Someone else said the same thing again. In order to distract themselves from the extreme anxiety, they repeated it over and over, like a prayer out of a desire to return home alive. There were 45 guards defending this barricade. They carried long spears and wore leather armor. One of the men had a helmet on. This was Bona Ingri, one of the several captains. He may have been called a captain of the guard, but he was no different from an ordinary guard. He didn't have a particularly superior physique, nor was he a terribly quick thinker. The younger guards were probably stronger. The truth is, he'd acquired the rank only because he was 40, and had been a guard for so long that when a position opened up and no one else was suitable, he slipped into it. His face was pale, and he was gripping his spear so hard that his knuckles had turned white. His legs were shaking. The reason he didn't shift his gaze was probably because looking around was scarier. He seemed so unreliable that the anxiety of the other guards grew. But this was the first time he'd ever risked his life in battle, so it probably couldn't be helped. Yes, the kingdom went to the Kot's Plain each year for the war with the Empire, but the role of the guards was to defend the city, so they weren't dispatched to the front. For that reason, the job was the most desired one for citizens who didn't want to go to war. But now, up until now, he might have gotten into some verbal scuffles with drunkards, but he only rarely had to jump in to stop a knife fight, so he had never experienced a more frightening situation than that very moment. The only reason he could resist the urge to run away was that he was sure he wouldn't be forgiven for deserting. Even if they were lenient, the whole reason he was exempt from fighting in the war with the Empire was his duty to protect the city. If he couldn't do that, they would definitely force him to go to the front next time.
If I get out of this alive, I'm going to quit being a guard,
Bona grumbled. Several guards near him agreed.
Do you remember what the adventurers were saying? You mean that they encountered hellhounds, greater hellhounds, gazer devils, and demon swarms? Yeah. Does anyone have an idea what kind of monsters those are? Like, maybe if they have any weak points, or if there are things that work well against them.
There was no response. Everyone just looked at one another. Noticing their discontent and their undisguised looks that said, "This guy's useless," he turned his anger elsewhere.
Shit! The adventurers should have given us more details!
The adventurers who had given the guards the monster information had been heavily injured and in the middle of a desperate retreat. For that reason, it had been all they could do to just give the names. They didn't have the time or energy to describe appearances or attack methods. It was harsh to blame them for that. It was a failure of the commanders that, due to the lack of coordination between the guards and adventurers, information had not been shared efficiently, and the guards had to man the defensive line completely uninformed. And, actually, Not all the guard groups were operating without any idea of what was coming. Some units in the same conditions had gotten information. Those groups sent a handful of members to help transport the adventurers to the rear, during which they could ask the details of the situation. The reason this company hadn't done that was probably because Bona, the leader, hadn't come up with such a plan, and also because he thought it would be outrageous to reduce the number of guards defending the barricade.
They're probably getting paid more than us, so they should try harder and actually risk their lives.
A few people agreed as Bona jeered.
We'll risk our lives too, so they should keep fighting, not retreat, right?
Bona asked the guards in the area. Oblivious to the cold stares from the guards standing farther away, he and the people around him shouted their complaints about the adventurers.
Here they come!
Called one guard, who had remained on watch, without shifting his gaze an inch. Bona looked nauseated. Everyone saw the demons walking toward them down the street. The one at the head of the line was like a cross between a frog and a human. Its skin was a jaundiced color and gleamed with something mucus-like. Here and there on its hugely swollen body were faces, like the impressions of human heads forced against the skin from the inside. Its straight mouth seemed big enough to eat a person whole, and when it opened, an unusually long tongue licked the air. Hellhounds accompanied the froggy monster, as if waiting for a meal, and in the back were humanoids who appeared as though all their skin had been ripped off and were instead coated in a slimy black liquid. 15 hounds, 1 fat demon, and 6 skinless demons that had been flayed.
There's too many of them!
Bona boomed.
We can't do this! Run! Shut the hell up!
Someone screamed at him.
Can you be quiet for 1 damn second?
Bona gave a little shriek, but the guard who had yelled at him ignored it and turned to face the others with a tense expression.
Listen up! All you have to do is thrust with your spears. It's not our job to kill them. We just have to buy time. It's okay! We can live through this!
At the words, "live through this," a few guards gathered, and then a few more.
Okay, let's do this!
Faces frozen in fear. They fanned out and held up their spears.
You too!
Someone dragged Bona over to his appointed position. They couldn't afford to let him stand around uselessly. The hounds howled and tore into the barricade, trying to snap it apart. They crunched through the lumber with shocking speed. The guards thrust their spears into the gaps. Here and there, they heard a hound's short yelp. Even the ones who hadn't been stabbed moved away from the barricade in confusion. Then they paced around, growling deep in their throats as they took in the situation. Having calmed down a bit, the guards jabbed with their spears any time a hound approached. When they did, it would immediately go away. The guards' faces brightened. The way the demons in the back just grinned creepily and didn't make a move was worrying. But if time kept passing like this, that was fine. It wasn't as if they were there to defeat the demons.
What?
One of the guards cried out in terror at the scene taking place before him. The hounds all formed ranks, lining up abreast just past the reach of the spears. This behavior, different from the reckless charge from before, made the guards nervous. If they could have had some detailed knowledge about the monsters, they might have had a different way to cope. But as it was, all they could do was thrust their spears between the gaps in the barricade beams. They didn't have any specific ways to respond to their opponent's actions. As they stood with their spears, ready to thrust, the hounds opened their mouths, so wide their jaws appeared to detach. The red in the back of their throats wasn't just the color of their oral cavities. All at once, the crimson flames licked the barricade. The guard's entire field of vision turned red, as if the whole barricade had burst into flames. It was an intense degree of firepower, but too short to completely burn up the barricade. The same could not be said of the guards who'd been standing by behind it. Screams. Some had charred their eyes, while others had inhaled the flames, burning both their esophagus and lungs. They fell to the ground, The only ones who survived were the ones who'd been on the edges. All the guards in the center positions had taken direct hits and breathed their last.
I can't take this anymore!
It was on the tips of everyone's tongues, and the first one to say it was Bona. His subsequent actions were speedy. He cast away his spear and threw off his helmet. Having made himself a little lighter, he bolted. The remaining guards were stunned. It wasn't as if they hadn't considered the possibility of him fleeing, but to be so magnificently abandoned left them speechless. Bona ran at a speed that suggested that humans grew faster the more trapped they felt. They watched him go, mouths gaping. However, his escape came to an end when a demon fell down on him. The demon with the bloated body flew despite its lack of wings and dropped heavily onto Bona. It sounded like dry twigs snapping. They heard a voice sniffling in pain. Although the demon could have killed him easily, it chose not to. From the demon's next move, they knew it was not out of mercy. It lifted Bona into the air. Then, it opened its mouth and gobbled him up. Its already swollen stomach didn't expand to accommodate him. But there was one significant change. Among the faces pressed onto its body, a new one appeared. It was hard to tell, but it appeared to be Bona's. The guards couldn't move behind the barricade as they listened to it breaking down. Barricade. They had never had a wall. The demons came over the broken obstacle and began surrounding the guards. Quiet sobs could be heard, the crying of people who knew they would die. Next came the chuckles of the demons, laughing at the foolish humans. One guard, looking up at the night sky as if making an appeal to the gods, saw something unexpected. It was a strange party, approaching at high speed. 2 people were carrying a warrior in raven black armor. The warrior's crimson cape fluttered out behind him, and in either hand, he carried a huge sword.
Toss me!
Despite the distance, the guard had the feeling he heard a shout. It turned out to be true, since the 2 flying people let go. The warrior accelerated, as if an unseen power had given him a shove from behind, and descended to the ground in a gentle arc. He glided smoothly along the road, as if friction didn't slow his movement, cutting down a hellhound in his path, before finally coming to a stop. It was such a dramatic entrance that allies and enemies alike stopped what they were doing. His voice carried much better in the silence.
I'm Momon, an adventurer. I'll take your place. You guys fall back.
At first, they couldn't understand what the Dark Warrior was saying, but the barking of several hellhounds brought them back to their senses. He was their long-awaited backup.
Hellhounds. Just these? Even double this wouldn't have been very many.
The hellhounds attacked from every direction to brutally slaughter the Dark Warrior Momon. They encircled him completely, not leaving a single gap. If he used his swords to block, some would get around, bite into him, and rip him apart. If he sliced through them, the remaining ones would leap at him. He'd get body-checked by the hellhounds. His stance would crumple, and he wouldn't be able to evade their next assault. This assault was practically the definition of attacking with sheer numbers. It was no wonder the guards' expressions were also pained. But they had no idea what the truly strong were capable of. A giant sword arced through the air, causing a massive gust of wind. Everyone with eyes fell speechless. It was a single slicing attack. An ordinary person would have been able to cut through one enemy at most. But because of who was holding the sword, this slice could surpass the ordinary. 4 of the hellhounds that had seemed invincible to the guards fell onto the road in pieces. But perhaps because he'd swung as hard as he could, Momon's body was leaning off balance. There were still unharmed hellhounds remaining. If he wasn't centered, he wouldn't be able to evade their follow-up attacks. He may have been wearing tough armor, But the hellhound's fangs were sharp, and they had claws that could rip up iron. There was no way he would get away unscathed if so many attacked him at once. The guards imagined the adventurer who had come to save them covered in wounds. But that was too hasty a conclusion. Momon didn't even try to force his listing body back, but instead leaned into the flow to whirl around. His crimson cape fluttered behind him, creating a blazing swirl. With the nimble movements of a dancer, he planted his feet again, and his great swords howled as he swept from left to right. He sent the remaining hellhounds tumbling down the street. None of them could move properly anymore.
In just 2 slashes?
The guard's murmur spoke for everyone. Having witnessed such a feat, what other words could possibly come to mind?
So, what's left? An overeater and some gazer devils? How boring.
Leaving the guards with that murmured remark, Momon strode toward the demons. He might as well have been taking a stroll in a park. He was so unguarded. Normally, someone would have called out to stop him, but after what they'd just seen, no one felt it was necessary. The role of ordinary people was to watch the powerful warriors go. Perhaps unable to withstand the pressure of Momon's casual approach, the gazer demons emitted strange screams and attacked. A single blow. Sliced up bodies flew every which way. Momon's feet kept moving all the while. He continued his casual stroll as if he was walking through an empty meadow, as if the devils had never existed.
Whoa!
It most likely wasn't a reaction to the guard's voice, but the overeater opened its mouth, wide like a snake about to swallow its prey whole. Something like a flame flickered deep inside. The agony on the human faces and its body intensified. It was about to belch a scream of souls. The wailings of the expiring souls it had eaten caused the living to writhe in agony as their spirits withered. But before the overeater could finish, bam! It went flying. Momon had hurled his huge sword to cut through the demon's head, and the monster fell to the ground.
They're no problem as long as you kill them before they scream,
Momon said simply, and pulled his sword out of the corpse. It took less than a minute. The apparently unbeatable demons were annihilated. The guards cheered. Their voices rose in the soulful roar of those who had escaped death. Bathing in their surge of joy, Momon spoke to them quietly.
The adventurers should be mounting a counterattack operation soon. Hold this location just a little longer. Well, the demons were routed, so I doubt they'll attack again here for a while. Nabe, Evil Eye, if you please.
The 2 casters landed, and then lifted him up. Momon left the guards with a final call from the air.
I'm going to hurry on to subdue the enemy mastermind. Until then, protect the citizens behind you. I'm counting on you.
They sighed as they watched the party fly away. With such an amazing hero telling them to do so, it would be shameful if they didn't defend this line with their lives.
Hey, rebuild the barricade. We need to keep holding them back. Don't even think about what will happen if they break through.
5th Late Fire Moon, September, 3:44 a.m. The 2nd Charging Squad, comprised of adventurers who were mithril rank or higher, began advancing with Lacuse at the front and Tina at her side. At Lacuse's departure, she had been asked more than once to reconsider. People said that someone who could use resurrection magic shouldn't be on the front lines. But whether she went out or not made a huge difference in the force's strength. Momon's confrontation with the Aldebaoth was what they really needed to be prioritizing, so she couldn't very well hang back. The group avoided following Momon by entering via a different street and headed for their primary objective, the place where the guards were supposed to have erected a barricade. But what they saw when they arrived was a road dyed red, the scene of a brutal slaughter, strewn with scraps of flesh. Of course, the barricade had also been completely destroyed. There was no sign of it. The adventurers noisily bunched up and proceeded farther in, but they didn't even make it 30 yards before entering combat with a group of demons that came out of a side street. As soon as the battle started, the adventurers, who were individually stronger than the demons, were ahead. But the tables gradually turned. The cause was the numbers that outweighed the adventurers' individual strengths. There were so many demons, it felt like every single one in the region was there. "Don't fall back! Keep pushing!" Lacue shouted after casting support magic on everyone. Of course, none of the adventurers was falling back. They knew how important this operation was. They weren't about to retreat. Evil Eye's role was to stay close to Momon and intercept anything getting in his way, and their mission was to keep the demons at bay by keeping the pressure on. In that sense, clashing with this many head-on was the greatest support they could give Momon. The longer this battle raged, the better the chance of success for him and Evil Eye. Shouts and swords rang out. Spells went flying, skills were activated, fire breath burned people up. All the sounds overlapped. Lacuse checked the status of the battle and grimaced. The murmur of one adventurer had lodged itself in the back of her mind.
The demons are gradually getting stronger.
Could it be that a gate to whatever world the demons live in has opened, and stronger demons are being summoned through it? Could this wall of fire be a border? What will happen if time keeps passing like this? Even if we defeat Yaldabaoth, will the capital go back to normal? Could this all be for nothing? Nonsense. She scoffed and banished the countless worries from her mind. You don't know anything until you try. That was why Lacue swung her sword. Fire! One of the floating swords hanging in the air near her shoulder moved straight up and launched according to her order. The sword ripped through the sky and pierced the open mouth of a hellhound leaping to attack. The hound's corpse vanished without a trace. Lacuse glanced around and saw that they were completely surrounded. They'd ceased advancing some time ago, and the multi-layered ring of enemies around them showed no sign of thinning. All she could do now was slash her sword and fight. The vanguard put away their chipped and broken weapons and readied their spares. Casters who had run out of magical energy began casting with scrolls and wands. They were running out of resources. Orichalcum rank adventurers formed a protective circle around the wounded Mithril rank adventurers, who were completely out of magical energy. But still, this is bad. At this rate, we're going to be worn down to nothing. It's still not over. Haven't you beat Yaldabaoth yet? Hearing a scream, she whipped her head around and saw an adventurer crumple under the fierce blow of a demon. Faster than Lacuse could charge, Tina leaped at the enemy to plug up the hole that had formed. The adventurers behind the injured warrior dragged him in. He wasn't dead, but his terrible condition was obvious. The fact that no one cast a healing spell illustrated how much magical energy the priests and other faith casters had already used up. All we can do is pull out. If the balance shifted, they would be swallowed up in an instant. Lacuse couldn't let them die. She needed to take action, with an eye on what they would do in the event Momon was defeated. It was nearly impossible to retreat with a completely exhausted body. They needed to fall back while they still had a bit of energy remaining. With! She was about to shout, "Withdraw!" when she gasped at the sight of a grotesque demon dropping softly out of the sky. It was nearly 10 feet tall. It had a muscular body, but it was covered in reptilian scales. Its snake-like tail writhed. Its head was the skull of a goat. Pale blue flames blazed wildly in its gaping black orbits. Its arms were thick, and in its hands, it gripped a gigantic maul. It spread the bat wings that had been folded up on its back. When it beat them, a cold wind blew, and soul-crushing fear assailed Lacuse. Since she was protected by fear-resisting magic, she didn't panic. But this demonstration was enough for her to see that this demon was far stronger than the ones they'd fought so far. Sweat oozed out of her pores.
Oh no.
If she hadn't been short on magical energy and team members, she probably could have won somehow. If she had been able to look up information about their opponent before the battle, she would have no doubt been victorious. But under the current circumstances, she had virtually no chance. First off, Evil Eye, who possessed a vast amount of knowledge and can use powerful magic, was gone. Gagarin, who could block the enemy's weapon and counter, wasn't there either. Tia, who could deftly evade the enemy's attacks and make an aggressive strike with her ninjutsu, was also missing. There were only 2 of them present, and they were exhausted. When she looked at Tina, the response was a ready nod. Just as Lacus, gripping demonic sword Kilinarum tightly, was about to stride toward the demon, a nearby Orichalcum rank adventurer grabbed her shoulders and shouted,
"We'll hold it here! You should run!"
Lacus was caught off guard. He rapidly continued,
"If you survive, you can use resurrection magic on us. So you have to make it back even if the rest of us don't. For yourself and the people you could bring back to life."
The man's on his face and his chivalrous grin were overflowing with the charisma expected of an Orichalcum rank adventurer. All the sympathetic adventurers nodded. Objectively, what they said was correct. She could do more by staying alive and reviving those who fell here instead of risking your life to buy time. "I heard resurrection spells take tremendous resources, but please do it on the house for us. Isn't the princess paying?" "Let's make the nobles pay. They should at least put up some cash." With the relaxed bearing of people on their way to a picnic, a handful of adventurers left the circle. There'd been no gesture or wink. As if they had come to a collective decision, they moved in perfect harmony with one another to stand before the demon. Seeing the cheerful attitudes of the ones who had resolved to face this life-or-death battle, Lacus bit her lip and turned her back. "Break through! Summon all your strength! After this, all you need is the energy to run!" No sooner had she yelled than she herself was charging into the demon mob with Kilinarum. For defense, she could depend on only magic and her armor now. She would abandon herself to the most extreme extent possible and carve a trail of blood. She gritted her teeth against all sorts of pains, her flesh being gouged, hard objects stabbing at her, and endured it. She considered her health calmly and waited till the last second before casting a silent healing spell. Lacus had to make it back alive, but if she didn't throw herself into battle here, they wouldn't break through. She poured the majority of her remaining magic into Kilinarum. The sword sparkled bright, like the twinkling of stars, and the blade grew. Super Art! Dark Blade Mega Impact! A pitch-black explosion raged to the side as she swung. The low-level demons were swallowed up by the burst of neutral energy and disappeared one after another. It hadn't actually been necessary for her to shout the move's name. It was super effective. And yet, not even close. The scene before her tired eyes was a thick wall of demons, albeit low-level ones. She'd blown away so many, but the hole was already filled. Is it even possible to break through? The creeping anxiety annoyed her, and she swung Kilinarum, whose blade had gone back to normal size. Just then, behind the demons, she saw a metallic flash and heard a man roar.
"Six-fold slash of light!"
The sixth cut sliced into the demons.
"Six-fold slash of light! Flow acceleration! Ah!"
7 demons fell in pieces like butter under a hot knife. The other monsters stopped what they were doing and shrank from the sharpness. It seemed like there was nothing Razor Edge couldn't cut.
"Crush them!"
At Gaziv's shout, spears behind him came forward in a synchronized thrust. There was no mistaking those steely gleams. Behind him were more than a few dozen, countless spears thrusting forward to pierce the demons. The knights and soldiers, who had been defending the castle, an army of several hundred, flooded the street. The demons recoiled from the military force doubled their size, loosening their circle around the adventurers. A jubilant cheer went up, and the battered adventurers began retreating under the protection of the soldiers. "What is Captain Stronov doing here?" "I thought he stayed behind to defend the castle and the royal family." He must have heard her question, because he turned to face a specific direction. When Lacuse followed his gaze, her eyes nearly popped out of her head. An old man was standing there, under the protection of 4 priests and 4 arcane casters. On his head was the crown that, of all the people in the kingdom, only he was allowed to wear. And he was clad in armor. The king, Ramposa III. "This is way too dangerous." Yes, he was wearing armor. But some of the demons could pierce steel like it was nothing. And he may have had guards, but there was still the possibility that area of effect spells could break their defenses and hurt him. An ordinary human like the king would probably die instantly if he was caught in an area of effect spell. Lacuse had resurrection magic, but there was no way he would be able to withstand the loss of life force that accompanied the resurrection process.
This is what His Majesty said. Are you fellows supposed to protect this castle, this hunk of stone, or me? There could only be one answer. Our duty is to protect the king, so our battle takes place here. Charge!
An earth-shaking battle cry went up, and the army made a daring offensive. It was the numbers against numbers, and a violent clash. The moment it looked like they would stage a comeback, an orichalcum rank adventurer went flying into a wall, painting a bright red flower. A giant demon howled as if to say, "Come at me!" And the soldiers froze. There were some monsters that couldn't be beaten with numbers. "Captain Stronov, lend us your strength!"
You got it.
Lacuse's eyes widened when she heard the voices that joined the fray next.
Huh! Hold on! Think you might need help from a previously outstanding warrior?
There's also a ninja who plans on being outstanding in the future. She would never mistake those voices, but she couldn't believe it. Shocked, she shouted, "Gagarin! Tia!" The 2 familiar faces slowly came into view. They had their usual gear equipped and looked ready to fight at any moment.
Hey there! If we just kept sleeping, we would have lost our edge. So we asked Captain Stronov to bring us along.
"We can fight." That can't be true. Combat, immediately following resurrection, was in no way advisable. It was normal to rest until one became accustomed to the gap between one's current and former ability. And in the first place, they should have been totally drained. Despite all that, they stood to join the fray because they knew how important this battle was. They were here to back up everyone who had fought so far. Lacuse prayed, with all her heart, that Momon would defeat Yaldabaoth, and that he would drive the demon mob out of the city. 5th Late Fire Moon, September, 3:46 a.m. There he is. Ahead of them was a square, and the masked demon was standing imposingly in the center of it, making no attempt to hide. They didn't see any other demons in the area, but Evil Eye wasn't stupid enough to believe they weren't there. Their opponent registered the rapidly approaching presences and gave an elegant bow. There was only one thing that could explain that confidence. "Is this a trap? What should we do, Sir Momon?"
No matter what's waiting for us, our only option is to fight our way through.
You're exactly right. Evil Eye figured that Momon's more relaxed way of speaking to her was a product of their relationship deepening as they worked side by side, and she began to speak more like her normal self too. If she concealed her true self for too long, it would lead straight to a breakup if the relationship got serious. It was still too early to reveal her actual identity, but she judged that talking in her normal manner was fine.
Seems like they started on schedule.
They could hear the beating of drums and courageous battle cries from the rear. Momon figured the offensive had begun diminishing the enemy's defensive force, so he could fight Yaldabaoth one-on-one. They had one shot at this operation. There would be no second chances. The only way to save the kingdom was to defeat Yaldabaoth now. Yeah, you're right. We've entered the final phase of the operation. Sir Momon, Nabe and I will handle any supporting enemies. You can concentrate on Yaldabaoth and not worry about anything else.
Got it. You've been with me every step of the way. I hope that after we beat Yaldabaoth, we can make the triumphant return together. Nabe, fight alongside her. Know that my wish is for all three of us to make it home.
Understood, Mr. Momon. The three landed before Yaldabaoth. Evil Eye scanned the area and noticed a maid coming out of a building adjacent to the square. She was wearing the same bug mask as before, with its fixed expression. But Evil Eye could feel the loathing coming her way from beneath it. She can't be the only one. Between the bug maid and me, Yaldabaoth should know who is stronger. And since this time, Nabe, who's probably as strong as me, is here too, there's no way he would have the maid fight alone. He's either going to put the pressure on with numbers, or he has another subordinate of similar rank standing by. Just as she had assessed the situation, something cold crept up her spine. Behind the bug maid were others, all wearing the same mask as Yaldabaoth. They were each dressed in a different maid uniform. There were 4 of them! A total of 5 enemies, with combat ability comparable to hers. In a 2-on-5 battle, the difference between their abilities would be huge. It was a gap that meant their chance of winning was as good as non-existent. Shit! We underestimated Yaldabaoth's force! At this rate, they would be outnumbered, and the enemy would interfere with Momon in Yaldabaoth's battle, which should have happened on even terms. If even a little backup arrived during an evenly matched fight, it was very likely to decide the outcome. Just as the tables had turned in Evil Eye's earlier fight with the bug maid.
Okay, I'll leave those 5 to you,
said Momon, as he walked toward Yaldabaoth at a natural pace, with a sword in each hand. Watching his sturdy figure move away, her lack of confidence tormented her. How much less anxious she would feel hidden beneath that flowing red cape. Nearly reaching out after him, Evil Eye chided her weak heart. She had come here prepared to die. Just because there were more enemies than she expected didn't mean she could resort to pathetically crying for help. Plus, he had to have said that because he believed in her. Otherwise, he would never have turned away so bluntly. He's a decent man. Thinking about it again, she became convinced that was what his receding back was saying to them.
You and Nabe will be able to hold them off until I win.
Passionate flames blazed deep inside her.
Okay, here I come, demon!
Momon raised his voice and sliced at Yaldabaoth. The fierce battle had begun. Perhaps in order to not involve the other two, Momon kept pushing Yaldabaoth, moving their battle away. Okay, if I take 3 and you take 2, is that all right with you? Are you sure? I'm fine taking 3. She had the feeling Nabe suppressed a laugh. You'll take 2, and I'll take 3. Evil Eye grinned. She felt like she'd grasped a part of this woman's personality. Frankly, she'd taken a liking to her rival for Momon's affections. Sheesh, with Momon and Nabe, I feel like it might be okay to take off my ring and show them my true form. Well, if we make it back alive. You're a stubborn one, huh? Okay. Then I'll polish mine off quick and back you up. Just hold them off as best as you can without What? She realized that everyone, the 5 maids and Nabe, was looking at her. It was so creepily synchronized, it could have been prearranged. Nothing. Nabe replied coldly and slowly walked off to the side. Okay, I want 3 of you to be my opponents. I'll leave it up to you who comes with me. In response, the bug maid, a maid with braids, and a maid with rolled curls walked after her. The two who remained to face Evil Eye were one with their hair done up and one with long hair.
My name is Alpha, and this is Delta. We'll be your opponents.
I see. How polite you are. My name is Evil Eye. I'm the one who will defeat you!
She didn't feel like chatting to buy time. Thinking like that only got one overwhelmed and killed. All she could do was keep pushing.
Oh, how frightening.
Evil Eye used her ace move as her first. A skill that sent all the negative energy flowing through her body into a rage, imbuing her magical energy with it to strengthen her attacks.
Here I go!
She barked and cast a spell.